recently? Something happened with your little
Yeah.
brother.
It's more like a committee of the whole.
Okay. And he's now
Come on, it's
16,
like a regular
14?
meeting.
She was my old teacher. I know her name. Correcting me.
It's gonna be
Sheila
on the agenda
O'Neill
for
is
next
the
regular
Lynn
meeting,
Teachers Union
maybe.
president. That's what I was
It'll
saying.
be on the agenda for the next regular meeting.
Tomorrow, right?
What?
Do they have to have some
the fun
about
feature.
what they're doing? Things?
She got back to me, but I wasn't there 'cause it was
Proposed changes to policy subcommittee meeting.
You gotta be there. You miss opportunities.
I was in class.
You should.
What's that? Proposed
Yeah.
changes.
What are you? What
thing
are
at-
your grades like last semester?
Pat's thing is tomorrow, right?
Yes.
Are you going to that?
You can't say you got all A's
yeah.
and then say
Oh, I'm
B's.
going
Did
because
you get all A's or did you get
Try to teach her.
A's and B's?
No, you gotta come
And
over.
what about C's?
So I'll wear a patch shirt.
So you got a C. Is it honors Latin?
And then,
Is it regular Latin? So why are you taking it?
cut out,
You
cut
should
out a little
switch.
hair, go to Mass Interact.
You should know Latin and Spanish.
Anyone else we're waiting for? Or are we?
Did you see that in the paper?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay.
I gave everybody the night.
Good.
We got night stuff the whole rest.
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
week.
no, that's good.
So you got me
All right, cool.
stuck with me.
Just you?
He didn't.
Hey, I'm like two people.
Hey, how did the event go?
He didn't like
Huh?
How did the event go?
Which one? Oh, in DC? Incredible.
No, not DC. The what is the one he did? He was a model.
Oh, the
Arc.
the arc
Arc.
event. It was awesome. It really touched my heart. Matter of fact, if I'm holding you up, let me
No, go ahead.
Go on. So I saw the young man that I did the runway with at the Special Games at Tech, and so it's hundreds of people at this ARC event. A little nerve-wracking for a kid. Everybody yelling, lights and cameras or whatever. So he gripped my hand like pretty hard during it, and then he comes over at Tech, and I was like, "Oh, hey, there he is, Hi, Johnny, how you doing?" Comes over, grabs my hand again. All right, I know the deal. Come on, man.
That's awesome.
It went well, and I think they raised that night $700,000.
Oh wow.
Hey, they have a legislative breakfast over in Salem.
Say what?
They have a legislative breakfast every year
They
in
do.
May. In
But for this
Salem,
event,
and
I
it's
think it was
amazing.
300
It's
seats.
just,
Yeah, it was. They make money. Definitely.
Deep
It's a
pockets.
great organization.
Deep pockets over there. Yeah. Good
All right, ready?
nailed it.
All right, calling to order the policy subcommittee meeting and committee of the whole. Roll call, please.
Mr. Ford,
Present.
Mr. Nicholson,
Present.
Mr. Satterwhite.
Present.
Observing is Mr. Castellanos, Ms. Capola, and Ms. Gately.
Thank you. So the first item on the agenda is the attendance policy. We discussed this at our last meeting and had more questions and items to discuss, and so we scheduled this meeting tonight to be able to devote our full time and attention to it. Everyone should have received the proposed policy, which has the proposal that the administration had drafted for the last meeting, inserted as track changes so we can see what is going to remain and what is proposed to change. And the other difference from the last version we saw at the last meeting is a proposal for how to implement a version of the earn back that would be automated and therefore wouldn't require any additional administrative responsibilities on the part of guidance counselors or really anybody else, because it would be automated in the systems. We also got some responses on questions that were posed in the form of data, and so I think I'd open it up to questions about this proposal or about any of the other data that we received.
I would like to entertain a motion to accept this, having read through, and I think basically what we did is updated all of the issues that we highlighted. So, motion to accept. You can still second and then discuss.
Okay, second, and I just wanted to chime in as well. I think that the data that we got with regards to the questions that Brian asked with CRAs, with the information about us compared to urban districts, and dropout rates with regards to that, this is a good policy. and I support it, and the grade recovery is something that you and I discussed, and I'm glad that Dr. Tutwiler and his administration figured out a way for it to be done. It's simple, just show up. So I'm fine with it.
Other, Ms. Capola?
We can speak, but
Yeah.
I think going from 7 down to the 4 is harsh. I have talked to different people that work in the school system who are afraid to speak in regards to it, and have passed on that they would be interested in it going from 7, like down to a 6, down to a 5, to go down, slowly go down. The other part is acceptable, but to go from 7 to 4, instead go down over the next 3 years.
Mr. Castellanos?
I also feel, to echo Member Cupola, is going from 7 to 4. It's for me, I think that's a little bit of a pretty steep move. If we could progress, I feel like the progression step, the appropriate progressive step would be to go to 6 to 5 and then to 4. Because to implement that, I think it's going to take time to really include that in the day-to-day operation. I think a lot of kids who are already conditioned to that certain attendance policy that we have now, it's going to be difficult for the people who are on the fence. Especially, I see kids in the court systems that are already on the fence. We do have the attendance initiatives rolling out. We have the initiative is just starting, so it's also we're still getting that going. It's still I know it's in its early phases and stages. So I would like to if I believe I don't know if that's even possible to entertain, is to start off with 6 or 5. But going from 7 to 4, I believe it's a little difficult. But I do support what's been done with this policy, because I think it's a really solid policy. It's definitely really important to work on improving the district's attendance, and I appreciate the data that was provided to us to really to inform us of what's being done. And I know we looked at Chelsea's. Chelsea was a district that we looked at in policy, and some of their dropout rates are pretty high. And if we were going to follow some of what they're doing, I think we got to really pay attention to who we're really, role modeling our policy after. But I know there's been a lot of other people involved in this document, but just going from, 7 to 4, it might sound like, it's not that much, but it is when you got a kid who's working full time, or you got a 14-year-old kid who's parentified, and maybe their excuses are not really. Again, the process to validate what unexcused and excused absences is really difficult to measure, and I think a lot of districts really have a tough time to really get that going. Also, the capacity that we have to do that is really low. So, and I know it's a focus that the district has. We've had a district wide strategic planning process that really highlighted the importance of attendance, and I support the attendance initiative. But I just really would like to bring that to the table.
Ms. Gailey?
I disagree, because I have spoken to a lot of teachers that felt as people were taking advantage of the 7-day and they were using it as personal days. Other than that, when you do the math, it's 7 times 4. You're taking 28 days off in this school year, and that's not a good habit to get into if you're going to go into the workforce. Then if you go to 6, you're taking 24 days. In this attendance policy, it does make exceptions for those things that you've mentioned. But 4 times 4 is 16 days and 180 days. That would align and help them develop better habits, I believe, going into a workforce where they'll be moving into it for success. That's how I look at this attendance policy, and I think it's more successful to allow students to know, there are exceptions, and it is in this policy that they make amends for. That's all I have to say.
Right. Yeah, Mr. Ford, then Mr. Satterwhite.
Yeah, I originally thought that the 7 to 4 might be a little harsh, but I think there's enough checks and balances within the policy to cover the kids that have legitimate problems. I looked at these as like we used to refer to in GE as go to hell days. You got them in your pocket. If you don't use them, you dump, and that's what the kids were doing.
Yeah.
They're smart enough to know I got 3 more days to get to 6. I can't get in trouble. So I think it was like an entitlement, and I think we just took the entitlement away. I don't think there's anything in here that's trying to be punitive.
And again, these are unexcused absences. Hopefully, if there's an excuse, they follow the proper procedures. But even for Chelsea, it's 3 or more unexcused absences that result in the consequences of the failing grade. So, we're one above the school district you just referenced. I think that kids need to be smart about their time. They need to be able to manage it. And I understand that sometimes you're in situations at home where things are out of your control. And just last week, Brian, when we went to the genetic resilience event with Rick Breedy, I spoke to a young man who went to classical, and he was telling me that he was following us in our discussions with regards to the policy change for attendance, and he had to miss school because he had a younger sibling, and his parents had to work. He had to take the day off to stay at home with his younger sibling. You need food, you need to pay rent, or you can miss a day of school. So, we were talking about that, and then one of the things that I said is, what's being proposed is the credit recovery. He's like, man, I wish I had that. I wish I had that. So, that's good for the 3 quarters. In the 4th quarter, if you haven't been in the game, you don't show up late, there's only so much we can do if you're not there learning. But, we have to take into consideration, the unique community we have, and I think that we did that when we brought in a grade recovery, not initially supported by the superintendent, but as we discussed it and went along, it's in the final product, and I think that shows that compromise took place here.
Any other comments on that?
Just one. The state has, as Ms. Gately pointed out, a criterion around, or how they define chronic absenteeism is 18. I think our expectation should, at a minimum, be at that point, if not lower. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I'd say is I do think that, to echo what Attorney Satter was saying, that some of the idea behind the earnback was to acknowledge that this is a change and to allow, while we're going to be sort of more stronger in expectation in aligning that with the expectation that Dr. Toller just talked about, we're going to give you an opportunity to earn that back when you do run into trouble. And like my colleagues pointed out, this is trouble beyond what we consider to be excused absences. So I do think that that's going to be a helpful option. So unless there was other comments or questions, there is a motion on the floor to adopt the policy as proposed and recommend to the full committee. Is that right?
Recommend to full committee.
Yeah, right.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Mr. Nicholson?
Yes.
Mr. Satterwhite?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is the policy manual. As you will recall, we discussed earlier this spring the state of our school committee policies and a sort of a gap in the record of what we believe to be the school committee policies as they're presented on the website and the official policies as we have record of them having been adopted. And the latter, the policies we have that are recorded as being adopted go back decades into that old document that we had seen and distributed at the meeting we discussed this, and so we were going to work on addressing this. Our secretary, Ms. Jules, has done a wonderful job combing through what her position had as the record of the policies, which was a binder, not the document that we had that was from the 1970s, but a binder of policies that was put together, including some that had been adopted officially and some that the MASC had provided to us in the last time that we did this kind of comprehensive review, which was, I think, 20 or so years ago. And she pulled out the policies in that binder that had record of when they were adopted. And that's the list that you have here. And as you can see, there are substantial gaps in what we would expect to be in the full binder of policies and what was officially adopted. And so maybe a majority of the policies that were in that binder had not been adopted or had not had record of adoption by the full committee, and therefore, and that gap in what was actually adopted and what was in the binder was what brought us to that decades-old document, because that was the last document we had record of having been adopted.
So are you talking about the 1977 document?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And that is referred to as the rules of the school committee, not necessarily the policies.
Right.
So I think that whatever we do, we have to merge whatever the two are and put together a policy.
Yeah, exactly. I think the reason, I mean, the naming is confusing because they're called different things, but the reason why we go to the rules of the school committee is because there are gaps in what the policies are that's covered by that subject matter.
And we, every time we convene in the beginning of the year, I guess we reapprove those rules, right? Like we
adopt the rules.
We adopt them, so.
Right. So that's why they're in place. So Attorney Myhouse reached out to the Glenn Kuchar, the Mass Association of School Committees, and they offer a service where they review all your current policies and recommend policies that are up to date in the eyes of DESE and sort of work with the school committee to get the policies in shape to reflect what the district intends them to be and what the Department of Elementary and Secondary and Education expect them to be. So that service is cost $10,000, and it can be split over 3 years if we would want to do that. But I think it's something that we should consider as a way to address not only the fact that there are some gaps in the records of what's been approved that force us to go back to this whole document, but also because we haven't worked with MASC on this in some time, and there's been updates at the state level, and that would ensure that we're up to date in the eyes of the state in terms of what our policies are. So I think what we could do is invite Mr. Kuchar to come and give us some more information about what that review would entail. But I wanted to first of all share this update with the committee because Ms. Julis has done a great job working through this, and we said that we come back and give an update. But also to get your thoughts on that as a potential next step.
Considering we're the policy subcommittee and there are only 3 of us, it's a lot of work. I've sat there, I think I've invested maybe 4 or 5 hours and looking at the rules and seeing what's relevant, what's not relevant, which makes sense, what doesn't make sense, what changes I'd like to see, but that's based off of what is in this document. So if half of it's not relevant or unlawful, then obviously that's an issue. But I think Attorney Myhouse had said when they passed these laws, if we already had these rules in place, these rules...
That's correct.
Okay.
Education reform was adopted after these rules were accepted.
So that there still are rules. They might be contrary to
Right.
the state level, but it's still our rules.
What Glenn Kuchar told me was that the service has been provided, and a lot of the majority of the school committees in the Commonwealth have used that service. And he'd like to come down and, obviously, he wants a liaison between himself and the school committee to go through what we have, what we don't have, and make a recommendation so far as what should be adopted under the new policies you're going to go forward with. And as Mr. Nicholson stated, it's $10,000 for the service. They come down and do an investigation of your total policy and make recommendations how it should be changed. And recommend what should be the policy of the school committee, which obviously you have to adopt. You're not mandated to adopt. It's up to you people to make your own determination. It's either payable in one payment, 10,000, or over the course of 3 years. But that won't stop it from being implemented, even if you choose to make it over 3 years.
And it's not cookie cutter, meaning if we want things specific to our district, we're going to be able to collaborate with them to make that possible.
Right, yeah, I think that would be, not only would we have flexibility in which of the recommendations we accept, but I think the idea would be that they would work with what the policies that we have already so that we can incorporate what we have that's Lynn specific as it fits into what the latest is at the state level. And that's why I think it's really helpful that we have this list that Ms. Jules prepared of
Yep.
all the specific policies that have been approved in the last 10, 15 years to see how they sort of slot into what the standard template is at the MSC, from the MASC.
I'd like to invite them to talk to the full committee.
Okay. Other thoughts or questions about where we are on that? Okay.
Do I need to make a motion to invite them?
Sure, let's make a, motion.
I'd like to make a motion to invite Glenn of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees to come and speak to the full committee about the policy product that they have for $10,000.
Second?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Mr. Nicholson?
Yes.
Mr. Satterwhite?
Yes.
And recommend to full committee?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. I think that's all we had on our agenda for the policy subcommittee.
Motion adjourned?
Second.
And seconded, adjourned.
Undebatable.
I mean, like,
Oh, what do I do now?
pressure of like trying to finish.